Okay, so this was our first performance full run through once we'd done about one rehearsal. So we'd figured out the transitions and we were looking at this small section of the script that we were going to choose potentially for our piece. I'm going to talk through it as we go.
2, 1, go.
So as I talked about before, this set we established really early on. So the set out of the kitchen, laying cutlery, the ideas of potentially laying cutlery, characterization between masculine and feminine, the male characters, female characters, and these like sort of bystanding characters too. So that was the first transition. We spent some time actually practicing on getting the similarity between that. Leaving like a 3-second pause between each transition as well to sort of differentiate between coming in and out of character, and making sure that when we were transferring characters and changing, we were in neutral.
She's taking the time.
We spent a lot of time trying to get this synchronized ideas into like what characteristics each character would show initially, like the way we sat and physical demonstrations of it, but also having some personal touch and flair to it because these are like variations of the same scene as well, and automatically you sort of have that. It's a bit messy in the transitions itself, but it could be seen as sort of chaotic, but I think that if we practice this more it would still like become effective, and like the way that we transition could have more meaning to it rather than just being kind of like chaotic or as a use of having too many people. And I can understand where we got feedback for this. A lot of people said that the transitions kind of seemed like it was a bit repetitive, especially towards the beginning because the scenes are so very short. But I think that in the way that Carol Churchill did this was to sort of probably get the audience used to the dynamic of the whole play, because this isn't just an aspect of the play, this is like what the whole of Heart's Desire is about, Whole of Blue Heart. It's about the repetition of the scenes, and that's what the whole play consists of. So I think you sort of have to get your audience used to the transition in, and we managed to do it quite quickly, and I think we've even got it quite effectively at this point potentially, but I can understand why people might find it a bit like repetitive, but that's the whole premise of the play. I think Carol Churchill wanted that. I guess if her play was longer there'd be more time and scope for this repetitiveness, so it wouldn't seem as long, whereas we've only got a 10-minute extract. But I think if we execute this well, it'll get a new like fresh audience, if we were going to perform it, used to the idea of the repetition. See, that I feel like there's not a lot of characterization. There's some reaction with me and Catherine. You can tell that we're obviously like used to her droning on the character that Marlon's playing, but it's like we've not really got the characters established yet and their relationship shown, so I can understand how that may be confusing to an audience at this point, but obviously this is something that we're going to develop on. Also, another thing I think we need to focus on is where the other people are looking, say like the bystanding people. I think it's good that these two are sort of just looking straight out, but we could be like watching the action, but as long as it's all the same, then it sort of creates this effect of control.
It makes you think, what else could exist? Tigers, patrons, anyway, plastics. It's always been my favourite animal. It doesn't lay eggs like a duck. It's a marsupial, like a kangaroo. So the babies will like a thread, like expecting this to crawl into the pub. Is that right? Is it platypus?
There's not a lot of like intonation and like use of voice and tone and stuff, probably because we've just literally just started reading the script and stuff. That's something else that we all needed to work on, I think, from looking at this rehearsal.
I'm not sure. Maybe it doesn't lay eggs like a duck. I'll look it up, ask her when she comes, and I wonder if she's ever seen one. Maybe she was swimming in the river, and there was this little furry.
So sort of like cuts him off here. I think initially, straight after this, which I talk about in my next vlog, is like the fact main feedback we got was like it was unclear when it's to start and stop, and the scenes, you didn't really know if they were fully finished. It was unclear to an audience. It seemed clear to us in our heads, so that's why we created the like trigger noise that after this lesson decided to use to sort of show the transitions, the start and end of the transitions, so it made it like clearer for an audience and clearer for us to sort of walk in unison and stuff as well.
She's taking its time.
I think at this point it is clear that there is a repetition, that the scenes are repeating, but I guess to an audience it's sort of the reasoning behind that and why and what relevance that has that we need to figure out more.
You should know. She'll be exhausted. She's a woman of 35. How can you speak of exhausted? She's a woman of 35. So right, of course. She can travel around the world. She can travel the house.
And it's also, from looking back on this, it's also quite unclear to like what they're talking about. Like they're talking about somebody, but it's not clear. And I think like to establish their relationship more, their personality and stuff would help in understanding the whole storyline to what the intentions are to an audience that is unknown of what they're watching.
So delightful. So right.
As well, like this sort of like, I know that obviously Stanislavski, when we did Anatomy of a Suicide, it was different because it was in Stanislavski style, but some certain aspects I felt linked a lot to what we did in Anatomy of a Suicide. So we said that often like the Brecht techniques that we did when we did Anatomy of a Suicide was like the transitions and the fact that there were 3 simultaneous scenes. I think like this gave a lot of feelings similar to that in terms of like drawing from those Brecht feels of like the making sure it was still a play by like the transitions and the repetition of it. So
I'm leaving. Oh, haha, we're all supposed to be frantic and beg you to stay and say very sorry. Don't bother. I'm not going to bother. Don't worry.
it's also very unclear of the ages of these characters. I feel especially in this scene because they're like the childish sort of like arguments that you feel like they're having. And it's hard also that to establish that we're playing the same characters repeated, so this needs to be more clear.
I'll tell her I'm sorry and I'll phone her later to tell her where I am.
Also, because of the writer's intentions of the repetition, like because of the writer's intentions of like the variations and the resetting of scenes, the slight variations should change the characters, but because we've decided to change the like character, like person, the actor playing the character each time, it's about keeping that similarity but also keeping that writer's intention, Carol Churchill's intentions of variation between each reset that we might find a challenge, but I think that we could achieve by doing things that I've mentioned before, of course, because this was like only our first rehearsal,
Alice.
like full run through.
Alice. I don't think you.
She's taking the time.
Not really.
We should have met her.
Well, we shouldn't.
Like here, I don't know, it's like a bit almost boring. There's no like main message to follow. There's no like thing to intrigue an audience or for an audience to be thinking about, whereas I feel like Carol Churchill would have that in the back of her mind as like an sort of thing she's trying to show the audience because she's a political playwright. Whereas I feel like ours is like, obviously we're going to work on this because this is like our first rehearsal, but it's a bit boring in terms of like there should be more variation. We're focusing on trying to keep the characters same, but later on we'll focus on the variation to sort of have this main message and this interest.
How can you see
She's a woman of 35.
you say that, of course?
She can travel around the world. She can travel last.
It's so delightful for you always need to say that.
She didn't want to do that. She'll be here in a few minutes.
It's a little bit.
Wouldn't be if she didn't know she was being met there. We were just there and there I was.
I think this was a good variation. It breaks the fourth wall. It includes the audience. I don't really know whether like it has any intention at the moment. I think we thought of it as like a Brecht technique, like breaking the fourth wall and alienating the audience and stuff. But I don't know whether it had a deeper meaning, so I think we'd tie this into a deeper meaning of why we've done this, because it's more of a serious sort of incident. As later on as well as like a moment where kids run in and like we read ahead, so I think like that would have more relevance in the fact that why Churchill did this. As well that Leo was handing it to Marlon, so it's like this sort of, it is a play, but why have they put on the play sort of breaking the illusion of like the main characters not being able to see all these bystanders.
Yes.
And another transition.
She's taking his time. We shouldn't have played. She'll be exhausted.
She's been 35.
So again, it's like the repetition.
She'll be here in a few minutes. I'm talking about school tactic.
She's not with the force.
She said that, but it would be, she'd think that she would be a man. And then it was just that we was there, we were over there. She's sister and
It was quite like difficult language to sort of look at. Like this, trying to get this more like fluid and stuff.
We should not. She'll be exhausted. She's a little bit. She travel on the boat. She can travel last few hours. It's so delightful. All these people are so great. She said that, but it wouldn't be if she didn't know. No, she got so actually delighted. What we can say, I just put it with that now. She'll never come home to a stranger again. What do you mean? Of course she'll come again. In the event she goes back, of course she'll come again. She'll never come back first time again.
And then this is the introduction of Lewis's character. I think he has the most amount of characterization and interest to an audience, especially because we've been repeating these characters a lot. But it's also kind of a random character, so we need to establish more who he is to an
You're not
audience.
putting it in that condition.
We also wanted to use like a proper like an alcohol bottle or something like that to sort of show off like that he is an alcoholic, that he drinks a lot. And this sort of family dynamic I think works even better when Lewis is around, shows off a lot more characterization of Brian and Alice too. That's something we can consider later on. This is obviously a different kind of scene compared to the others. I think it's hard as well to establish like when it's repeating and when it's progression of time, because there's so many resets. You don't know whether this is another reset or another like a progression later on in the scene, just not reset yet. So I think like using a sound effect will help with that, because it won't seem like the audience will be unknowing. They'll be like, oh right, the scene's continuing, and it'll reset later.
That progression is, don't be that. That you always was Susie.
The intonation of that as well is something that we have deeply thought about into like what he's trying to say, because we feel like a lot of Lewis's lines have like associations with what kind of parents Alice and Brian are, and what kind of like relationship they have with their son and daughter, and how it differs, obviously because a lot of attention is drawn to Susie, their daughter, who they're obviously quite proud of and worried about when she's coming home. I feel like as well Maisie is a little bit like just kind of there, so we'll have to think about where else we could place her in this scene to sort of show off more of her character and interest, rather than just having her off to the side standing there, because it sort of seems a bit detached, or she seems like one of these people who's not really part of the scene.
Maisie, and get away from this load of